understand, in the grips of the global pandemic, court operations and other operations are the ease of them are impacted for sure. But today is just another in a line of examples of the fact that law enforcement remains very much engaged, and the work of law enforcement remains unyielding. The courthouse is currently closed under judicial order. However, our work continues both in the civil and criminal division of our office, largely in a seamless fashion. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today with regard to important criminal matter that I know you're all aware of. So thank you for coming over to the federal court. And I've got a brief statement, and then I'll take some of your questions when I get to the end. On the morning of May 6th, emergency services on the Spirit Lake Indian Reservation were called to a private residence out there within the exterior confines of the reservation. They were told that there was a minor child in need of medical care, and that it's possible the child was deceased. The Spirit Lake emergency personnel did in fact respond out to that private residence. They quickly located 5-year-old Raven Thompson. They were able to quickly determine, sadly, that Raven Thompson efforts to revive her were futile, and that she was in fact deceased. People on the scene, the law enforcement responded roughly the same time. First on the scene were the Bureau of Indian Affairs, BIA officials, quickly followed up thereafter by the FBI. An immediate survey of the premises, both inside and out, was conducted, and they soon thereafter located 7-year-old Zane Thompson. Zane Thompson was located in the inside of a vehicle that was there on the premises. Law enforcement and medical personnel on the scene determined very quickly that Zane was in need of immediate medical care. Zane was transported to a medical facility in Devil's Lake, where he was treated by medical professionals. It was very rapidly determined that his need for care was acute. He was taken by air ambulance from Devil's Lake to Fargo, where he was admitted for care. Over the course of several days, that care was administered in an intensive care unit. Still on the 6th of May, law enforcement immediately went into a high priority posture with regard to this case and its investigation. Eric Longy Jr. and Tammy Longy, also known as Tammy One Bear, were interviewed by law enforcement, FBI, in the jurisdictional lead on this matter, BIA rather, in support and partnership thereof. As I said, it was indicated very immediately as a top federal priority matter. A number of interviews were conducted in addition to those two subjects at the time, subjects of the investigation, and others, examinations, other interviews of minor children. It was quickly determined that there were 12 people on the premises when law enforcement arrived back on May 6th, a combination of adults and a number of minor children, including, as I mentioned, Zane Thompson and the then deceased Raven Thompson. Last week, based on that investigation, which I want to stress is an ongoing investigation, it is not in any way bookended by the activities of today. This is an important milestone in this investigation and procedure through. However, it is just that. It is a milestone. It is a very active investigation. Several witnesses yet to be interviewed forensically and otherwise, and that will continue on and has continued on in a seamless fashion. I want to commend the men and women of the FBI, the men and women of the BIA, and the others who have participated in this investigation, to include the forensic investigators and the medical professionals who played such a central role. Last week, my office prepared and presented to a federal magistrate arrest warrant, a proposed arrest warrant based on an affidavit of probable cause of the material involved in this case that we believed would be sufficient to support the issuance of an arrest warrant. I want to make clear, I know that those materials have been have been made public today. They obviously become uncovered when the court moves forward. I want to make very clear, they do not represent either the entirety of what we know and what is known to investigators at this time, nor do I expect that they will encompass the entirety of what we will continue to learn in this investigation. I want to stress that it's important we include in those documents only such information as is necessary and sufficient in our belief to uphold a determination of probable cause and the issuance of an arrest warrant. Judge Seneschal last week did issue that warrant after reviewing our materials, the prepared affidavits and the other probable cause materials. She reviewed that and did issue that warrant. Late Friday afternoon/early evening, federal law enforcement led by the FBI and BIA did take into custody the two defendants so far, Tammy Longy and Eric Longy. The complaints, which I know that you've seen already, and I'm going to explain complaints in a moment versus indictments. The complaints at this point contain a number of charges, all involving the alleged assaults on children. The two that I've already mentioned, Raven and Zane Thompson. The charges against both of the defendants allege assault resulting in serious bodily injury for what we allege are the injuries caused to Raven and the injuries caused to her brother, Zane. It should be noted that because of a statutory enhancement that comes along with the age of the victims, the alleged victims all being under the age of 18, the statutory enhancement makes each of those charges, each of them, for which both defendants are charged twice, each of those has a potential maximum penalty of life in prison. Both of the defendants are also charged with two separate counts of assault. Those pertain to two additional minor victims, which our investigation shows at this point for which there's probable cause to believe that they were assaulted by each of the defendants as well. That is today the entirety of the charges, but I stress again, this is an ongoing investigation. These arrests were made because probable cause had been attained in our belief. That belief was shared by the federal magistrate who signed that arrest warrant, and we believed as a matter of public safety that the defendants needed to be taken into custody immediately, and they were. The hearing in Grand Forks, these are complicated matters for the public and for the media included to be able to attend because of the prohibitions on any members of the public entering the courthouses. So that hearing took place in Grand Forks today, at the conclusion of which the defendants remain in custody. There's going to be an additional hearing on the 21st this week, currently scheduled for 1:30 p.m., at which time the United States will seek to have both of the defendants detained on these charges, noting again that our investigation continues. It's important that I keep stressing that because there is the possibility we are open to any and all avenues that are required and that are called for as a result of this investigation. We'll pursue any and all avenues for the potential for additional charges, the potential for changes to these charges, and the potential for additional defendants being charged in this case. I want to stress this is a matter of highest importance on the Spirit Lake Indian Reservation, the surrounding communities, and the entire state of North Dakota. It's an important matter for the United States. It's an important priority matter, our trust responsibilities in Indian country. This investigative foundation, although relatively fresh, we're still under 2 weeks on this investigation, the foundation being formed is solid. The investigators are doing a thorough and rigorous job. As we continue on through that, as we encounter additional potential people to be interviewed, others who are going to come into contact with law enforcement, others who know something about this case, others who know more about this case than they've shared with law enforcement to this point, I call on them to consider the following. Based on the investigation that we have, based on all of the interviews that have been had already, now is not the time to deceive. Now is not the time to withhold. Now is not the time to obstruct. The clock, as they say, is ticking. For anyone with information on this who would seek to have an opportunity to sit down with law enforcement and provide any and all information that they have. either on their own accord or when encountering law enforcement as they continue this important priority federal investigation. As I said, the detention hearing is scheduled for the 21st. That's this week. My information thus far is it'll be held up in Grand Forks, and we will withhold any further comment until then.
One of the things I know you have talked about these charges can change, and this investigation very active. But why weren't they charged with murder initially?
As I said, based on the information that we have right now, we've lodged the charges that we could put forward with the investigation that we have. There are always, it makes clear, in fact, even right in our arrest warrant and the probable cause materials, we make clear this is not including all of the information that we have in the investigation. We just really believe that as an intermediary matter that we go forward with these charges. And that's why I mentioned the potential maximum sentence for assault resulting in serious bodily injury, where, as we allege here, the victims are under the age of 18. That is a maximum potential penalty of life in prison. The same as the charge that you mentioned. But as I stress also, the importance of this investigation is in its earliest phases. It's continuing even as we speak. And law enforcement has a plan going forward for the other people to be who are going to be interviewed. And then every one of those, I've been doing this 16 years. Across all that time, every interview begets other interviews. It fills in the fullness of what you understand about the case and informs your judgments about how you go and interview other people based on what you know, or maybe go back and do it again. As I said, as people encounter law enforcement on this important matter, we call on anyone with information about these matters to come forward, to talk with law enforcement, share what they know. Anybody who's spoken with law enforcement already and has maybe thought twice about the fact that perhaps they held something back, now is the time. For those who are going to encounter law enforcement for the first time on this particular matter in the days and weeks ahead, calling them to keep the same analysis in mind. It's not a time to deceive. It's not a time to obstruct. There's no avenue for that for them, and their cooperation will be noted in this important matter.
Do you know any idea why social services have been called to the hospital, or had they been called to this specific?
I don't have any comment on anything to do with some of that information that's out there. I don't have any comment on that. Yep.
I got two quick questions.
Yeah.
Eric and Tammy, were they licensed to be foster parents?
That would be a question that you would need to direct to the appropriate tribal entity that has the oversight of that, in which in fact has the compliance requirements for that licensing. The representations made to us, and again, here in the infancy of the investigation, and because that's not the focus, it's not a foster care investigation, but it's been relayed to us they are the foster parents. Whether that means that they're licensed to do so appropriately by the tribe, that'll be determined as well. But I suspect there are people driving today who are not licensed drivers, and those things can happen as well. I just don't have the information on that, and that'll be something that tribal human services, or social services through Spirit Lake would have that information and be in charge of the compliance on that. It's a federal matter.
Any idea why Zane was in a car at 6:45 in the morning when they tried to bring him?
Well, I don't have any comment on the characterization of it. There are probably different, maybe there's an assortment of conclusions a person could derive from looking at that, but I wouldn't have a comment on that at this point. We're just certainly pleased that Zane was located as quickly as he was in light of his injuries in particular. He needed and received medical care, both initially in Devil's Lake and then after being airlifted to Fargo. I apologize. There's no additional information that I can comment on at this point. A bit of that is included in the charging documents. As I mentioned, we don't include everything in there for a couple of reasons. One, because that's a charging document. It's important for us to stress that as well. No one's been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of any crimes, and that remains the case unless and until that happens. So we put as much in there as we believe is required for probable cause determinations. There's a lot more information, of course, known to the medical professionals and people involved in this case, which at the appropriate time would be shared. There's a couple different avenues, but at some point that does become public, yes. We were given assurances very early on, from the earliest parts of this investigation, that all the children, all the minor children, had been removed from the premises and were out of harm's way. That was obviously, right along there with getting Zane in for medical care, ensuring that all of the other children were put into appropriate care situations. And they've been interviewed at this point, also by professional forensic examiners, and that work continues as well. There's not a way on the front end. There's not a way on the front end to know, but this will be our pledge. This investigation will go and will become exactly as large as the facts of it merit going forward. That's why I said in this and any investigation, we remain open to the possibility, in most cases the likelihood, that as you go through and your investigation blossoms even more and more fully, we remain open to the possibility of additional charges for these or other defendants. I don't have any comment on that at this point. I'm just going to leave that there. Right. I'm glad that you asked. They were charged. They are in the charging document. The charges of the what's called simple assault. Never one of my favorite words, but that's the statutory word. The simple assault charges pertained to the alleged assaults on child number 2 and child number 3, who have not been named publicly. Child number 1, in the materials that you've been able to review, child number 1 is Raven. Child number 4 is Zane. And they are biological siblings, by the way.
Was there a relationship between Tammy and Eric and the social service director there on the reservation?
I don't have any comment on that.
Has there been any changes at Fairlake Social Services and leadership since this all kind of transpired?
I don't have any comment on that either, and that's not that's not an area that we can inquire into. It's a tribal entity. We've heard some of the things that others have heard, but our concern was, of course, in a situation where you had known what we believe to be shown dangers with regard to all these children, that the other children be removed and put in a safe environment going forward. And that we're comfortable that's the case. Also, our investigators have had opportunities to, along with forensic professionals, forensic investigators, to go through some of the information in this case and learn what we can from the young minor children.
What kind of authority do you have to hold Fairlake Social Services accountable? Do you have
Well, it'd be preliminary to comment on that. I mean, at this point, here we are. We're not even 2 weeks into the investigation, and of course, as people would expect, it's focused like a laser on the immediate, acute need to protect those children. By the time law enforcement was called in, emergency services called in, arrived at the scene, it was too late to protect Raven. We have some notions of that. Yes, certainly we do, and some of that is included in the documents. You get a feel for that, I think, reading through the materials that have been made public today. But I wouldn't have any further comment right now.
Can you state the fact of how long they were under the care of Zane and Raven?
Yes, they were. It's as relayed to us by the Longies themselves. The children had been in their care as foster children since July of 2019, coming up on a year. Yep.
What will come of the detention hearing when we learn more facts that day? Is it like state court where it's kind of like a bail hearing where more facts have to come out?
Yeah.
Because you got to prove that burden?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do expect that there'll be additional materials that will be discussed at that time. The United States has our position that we've already developed with regard to these cases. I thought there was a possibility this would be addressed today, but that was not the case. And we're going to put forward the the very best fact-supported arguments that we've got to put forward on Thursday. I think that we mentioned the complications of covering court operations when we are in a situation where, for health reasons, the courthouse has got to remain closed to the public. I don't know what the answer is, whether there's a way for the media, either through a pool process or something else, to access that hearing. But nothing from the court's orders or anything else that I've seen that changes the public nature of the hearings. So I guess, not telling any of you how to do your job, I would guess, though, if you contact the clerk's office, especially if we've got a couple of days of lead time, and mention that you'd like some way to phone in, because from time to time we've got hearings going on where the defense lawyer's on the phone. We had one a few weeks ago, in fact, where we came out here and talked to the media afterward. The defense lawyer was on the phone, the defendant was in the courtroom, myself and Assistant U.S. Attorney Matt Greenlee were in the room, and the judge was remote in Grand Forks. So perhaps there's a way that it can be accommodated.
Now, I know you spoke about how great this case is, but why weren't they arrested May 8th, May 7th? Why that Friday, last Friday?
Oh, in an investigation of this nature, there are reasons why things will percolate through a little bit. There are just law enforcement, I'll call them tactical reasons, but also there are practical reasons about making sure that you don't just get to the scene and draw conclusions about what you're observing. You have to have an opportunity to interview, in this case, several very young witnesses who have been traumatized by a very difficult situation. We needed to wait for Zane to stabilize to a point where his medical professionals treating him felt it was responsible for us to be able to have a conversation with him. So that sort of played out, and it was a situation where, candidly, law enforcement was aware of the whereabouts of the Longies, and law enforcement was comfortable with what did happening, that they were there, and still on the Spirit Lake Reservation on Friday, law enforcement was able to arrest them without incident and proceed. So that's a good question, but that's the gist of it. You've got to make your way through that in its steps, and there are critical witnesses that need to be interviewed when there wasn't, as it were, a law enforcement witness to what took place initially, and so yeah, without an immediate concern for flight, and I think how the investigation is borne out has really supports the conclusions that were made by law enforcement on the timing. As I said, they were able to arrest the Thompsons. The Longies, arrest the Longies without incident in a place where law enforcement knew they were going to be and where they were. So I can't. I apologize. I can't hear her.
She's saying justice for Raven.
I agree. I agree with the call for justice for Raven. I agree with the call for justice for Zane. I agree with the call for justice for child victims number 2 and 3, who will be named at a future point. And any and all charges that we're going to bring in this case are going to be supported by, if brought, be supported by an investigation that is thorough. That I compliment. It's a complicated environment sometimes with what's going on with the pandemic. It impacts the work of law enforcement and everyone else. And like I say, this was instantly a top priority matter for federal law enforcement, for the United States Attorney's Office, and it continues on up ahead.
I realize every case is different. Is this case in any way more complicated than maybe your typical murder case?
As I told you, I've been doing this work for 16 years, and there are cases that get covered by the media. There are cases that do not get covered by the media. There are cases that have truckloads of discovery involved in them because they involve cell phones and all sorts of other records. And then some, I've tried very serious cases with a file that thick based on the discovery in the case too. And I can tell you, after all those years, there are shorter trials. There are shorter investigations. There are longer ones. There's some that gather more attention, but there are none of them that are easy. There are none of them that don't require full attention and expertise of the law enforcement people that are involved in it. And so I always do reject the invitation to to characterize one case as the biggest this kind of case or that kind of case or the most complicated, because at the very important human level, a mentor of mine once said, whatever the crime rate is in your community, whatever, however well you're doing on robbery cases or any other kind of case, for the person it happens to, the crime rate is 100%. And that's how we approach our work in the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Why is this case such a top priority? I know you said you're
Yeah.
different than the other federal prosecutors. You kind of been a little bit more talkative though about this case.
Yeah, no,
Why is this?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I wouldn't characterize more or less talkative about it either. It's an important matter because federal law enforcement does have a particular stewardship, trust obligation on Native American lands. For major crimes, we are the only jurisdiction, we're the only recourse that they have in Indian country, federal law enforcement. And I say that meaningfully, a meaningful sentence, meaningful justice for people when found guilty of major crimes. And so, and then any crime that involves violence or other unlawful acts with regard to young, particularly vulnerable victims, that goes pretty quickly up the ladder. And you even see it in this federal sentencing enhancements, right? Because of the age of the alleged victims in this case, assault resulting in serious bodily injury for both Raven, who is deceased, and for Zane, who was just very seriously injured, for both of them, the maximum penalty, if proven beyond a reasonable doubt, life in prison. Speaks very well to what makes this a top priority matter.
What's your message to Indian country? I mean, this is probably one of the big first cases you've had since being sworn in again as U.S. Attorney. What's your message on violence on Indian country?
I would only tell you, I've been here I did this job for 8 years before. I've done it for a year now. I just would disagree with you that it's the first. We've had a steady flow of Indian country cases coming in here. We have matters percolating in the narcotics trafficking arena, in violent crime response to those matters, fraud crimes. You go back and check until the last 3 or 4 months, where now we're kind of we're not standing down, but certainly these cases are somewhat stacking up. No one's going to escape justice, but in some of the cases that don't have particularized and immediate violent crime considerations, they kind of get put to the back because the grand jury can't sit. So we have to charge by complaint. I'm glad you actually raised that, because I had said something. The complaint process is different from the grand jury, and that's the U.S. attorney saying, we believe we have probable cause, and we're going to give that to a federal magistrate, and if he or she agrees, they'll sign that arrest warrant, and then you can arrest them. But you still have to get the defendant, you have to put that case, that probable cause information, in front of a grand jury or a federal district court judge to have a probable cause hearing within 30 days, or there's some technicalities about that, but that's incumbent upon us to do that next. So, while it might seem like there's a pause, we've come out and talked about a couple cases because the violence alleged is so acute and immediate, and the need to move so rapidly is so evident. And this is one of those cases that we had to go ahead and charge by complaint. But if you look at the statistics over the last year, I think you'll see that we've continued a decades-long tradition in this office of prioritizing violent crime in Indian country. I do feel like it's another story for another day. I do think that we have elevated maybe even quite significantly the prioritization of narcotics trafficking in Indian country. And I'll look forward to the first opportunity to talk with all of you about that, because we've got some important work that's getting done there. But this is, as I say, I just hired, we had 5 openings in the U.S. Attorney's Office a while back. And we were going through and talking with we were going to hire 2 civil practitioners and 3 criminal prosecutors. And they would all ask, well, what's it like prosecuting cases in Indian country? And I said, I prosecuted in Philly, one of the most violent cities in America, for 5 years as an assistant DA. I said, it's very similar to that. And you've got a lot of the same challenges. And I choose my words carefully. It's a sacred responsibility. It's a sacred responsibility that is ours when it comes to the more serious crimes out there. And I'll tell you, to a person, these new lawyers are joining a long chain of people in this building across many decades. Way before me, I interned here. I was an intern in this building back when I was in law school, and the passion with which people pursue justice in Indian country is really something, and we're proud to continue that. And this case is, as I said, as important as what's happened today. It's as important to continue to stress that this is an open and active investigation, and our work in Indian country generally has been, is, and is going to remain a top priority for this office. Any other questions? I really appreciate you all coming in, and I regret the delay there a little bit, but we were waiting to get word down from there. The last thing we need is the U.S. attorney being thrown in jail because he came out too quick before the hearing was done. Generally do appreciate you showing up here today, and Thursday, I would check with the clerk's office to see whether there's some way that they can accommodate you being in there. I don't intend at this point to have a conference like this, but I'm always available. Most of you have my phone number. Any of you can have it. We want to be answering questions that you have, if there are any, after the hearing on Thursday.
Have people been cooperative with this investigation? The Launchies, the other adults in the home?
Many people have been very cooperative, yes.
You are getting cooperation?
We're getting some cooperation, yeah.
Some or a lot?
Well, I don't want to characterize that either. You can always, cooperation's always a good thing, right? That's one of those things that you never have enough cooperation. There are people that know more about this. I strongly advise that they proactively make themselves available to law enforcement, not to tell a version of events, to tell the truth about what they know, to tell the full and complete version of what they know, other additional evidence, anything that they have. If they have kind of a hunch that it might be of assistance, they should come forward, because sooner or later someone's going to be knocking at their door and asking them about this if they're in any way associated, and that's an important part of an investigation too. And as I mentioned before, the clock is ticking for people. If they've been interviewed and they feel they've got additional information that they either just forgot about at that time or hadn't come forward with, now is the time. If they haven't been contacted by law enforcement yet and they have additional information that could bear on this investigation, now is the time to come forward with that as well. And we'll look forward to continuing to develop this case forward. But as we stand here today, these charges, as shown by the arrest warrant, supported by the probable cause determination, and before long, this courthouse is going to be operating again and having full hearings and trials and everything else going forward. No cases are being passed over, no cases are being put away or people escaping justice. But in some of these instances, it's been slowed down a little bit.